the mysterious blind alien girl. On the edge of the galaxy, hidden on a planet that few humans knew existed, lived a strange and mysterious alien girl named Ray. The planet, called Varia, was known for its advanced and powerful species, creatures that could manipulate energy, travel through the stars, and perform feats that seemed impossible to other races. Yet, despite all their strength, there was one thing that set Ray apart. She was blind. To most of the aliens, this was a weakness. They saw her blindness as a limitation, a flaw that made her less than others. But they didn't understand her, not truly. And that was exactly why Ray was more dangerous than anyone could ever guess. Ray's species, a Varian, had evolved over thousands of years to be stronger, faster, and more intelligent than most other species in the universe. They could see through walls, hear the smallest sounds from miles away, and control elements with their minds. But Ray's blindness seemed like an oddity, a mistake of nature. To them, she was just another girl lost in the dark. But Ray had never seen herself that way. She knew something that no one else did. Her blindness wasn't a weakness. It was a gift. While the Varian used their sharp eyes and keen hearing, Ray had learned to rely on something much deeper, a sixth sense, a way of knowing the world around her without seeing or hearing it. It was as if the world spoke to her in a language that only she could understand. Every sound, every shift in the air, every vibration of the ground beneath her feet was a message that she could interpret. Most of the Varian didn't believe in this. They thought it was just the product of her imagination. They couldn't see what she saw, or felt, rather, so they dismissed her. Ray had never cared what they thought. She knew what she was capable of, and deep down, she knew she would prove it to them one day. The elders of the Varian Council had long debated whether or not Ray should be allowed to participate in the annual challenge. This challenge was the ultimate test of strength, intelligence, and courage. It was an event that the most powerful males of their species looked forward to every year, as it proved who was worthy of leadership and respect. But Ray, the girl who couldn't see, many of the males scoffed at the idea of her entering. "She'll never survive," they whispered. "What use is a blind girl in the challenge?" But Ray wasn't interested in their opinions. She had heard their cruel words, of course. The voices of doubt and mockery had become so familiar to her that they barely affected her anymore. All she cared about was showing them that she could do what they thought was impossible. The challenge was held in the heart of Varia's vast wilderness, a place of wild terrain, deep caves, and dangerous creatures. Only the bravest and most skilled were chosen to compete, and the test was unlike anything the Varian had ever experienced. The competitors had to survive the wilds, solve puzzles that tested their minds, and fight terrifying creatures that lurked in the dark corners of the planet. It was a trial of both body and mind, and only the strongest made it to the end. The other contestants were all males, towering giants of muscle and power. They were confident, arrogant even, and they looked down on Ray, believing she had no chance of surviving. But the more they laughed at her, the more determined she became. Ray had spent her whole life preparing for this moment. While the others trained with weapons and honed their physical abilities, Ray focused on something else entirely. She learned to listen to the subtle shifts in the air, to feel the vibrations of the earth beneath her, to understand the language of nature itself. She could tell when a creature was nearby by the way it moved through the air, and she could sense danger long before it reached her. But it wasn't just her abilities that made her so intriguing. There was something about Ray's presence that fascinated the males. Even though they doubted her abilities, they couldn't help but be drawn to her calm, unwavering confidence. She had a way of carrying herself, quiet yet strong, humble yet proud, that made her stand out even among the most powerful Varian. One male, Kaldor, watched her from a distance. He was known as one of the strongest and most skilled warriors in the land, but something about Ray unsettled him. He had seen her practice in secret, pushing herself beyond what any blind person should be able to do. And yet, every time she succeeded, he found himself more and more amazed. What was it about her? How was she doing things that no one else could? "I don't trust her," Calder said to himself one evening, watching her train alone. No one should be able to do what she does. She must be hiding something, but no one knew the truth. No one knew the depth of Ray's power, or the secret that lay hidden within her, waiting to be unlocked. As the day of the challenge grew closer, the tension among the Varian increased. The males were sure that Ray would fail. They believed her blindness made her weak, and no matter how many times she proved them wrong, they refused to believe that a girl like her could ever be anything more than a curiosity. But they would soon learn. Ray was not just a blind alien girl. She was a force, a mystery that even the most powerful among them couldn't understand, and soon they would have no choice but to believe in her. The stage was set. The challenge was about to begin, and Ray was ready to show them all just how wrong they had been. The challenge set by the elders. The morning of the challenge arrived, and the air on Varia felt thick with tension. The sky, which was usually a deep shade of violet, was now dimmed by the heavy clouds that hung low, as though the planet itself was holding its breath. Across the wide, open fields where the challenge would take place, the alien males stood in clusters, preparing themselves with weapons and strategies. Their armor gleamed in the pale light, and their eyes glinted with arrogance and confidence. They were ready. The question was Ray ready? Ray stood at the edge of the arena, the crowd's murmurs rising and falling around her like a wave. She wasn't nervous. In fact, she felt nothing but calm determination. The other contestants towered over her, their figures large and imposing. But Ray wasn't focused on their strength or size. She wasn't even concerned with their weapons or their abilities. In her mind, they were already irrelevant. The elders of the Varian Council, who had long debated whether Ray should even be allowed to compete, had made their decision. They had agreed that the blind girl would face the trial, but only under one condition. She would have to pass a special test to prove that she had the strength and intellect to compete against the mightiest of their species. Ray could sense the eyes of the crowd on her, feeling their judgment, their doubts. But it didn't matter. She wasn't here for their approval. She was here to show them what she could do, to prove that even in darkness, there could be light. The trial was about to begin. At the center of the arena, the elders' leader, an ancient Varian named Theris, stepped forward. His voice boomed across the grounds, silencing the crowd in an instant. "The challenge begins now," Theris declared. "The competitors will face 3 tests: survival, intellect, and combat. But Ray," he said, his voice sharp, "you will face an additional challenge, one that will test your worth more than any of these males could understand. If you succeed, we will acknowledge your place among us. But if you fail, you will leave this arena as nothing more than a forgotten dream." The crowd's laughter echoed around the arena. They thought it was a joke. How could a blind girl survive, let alone outwit and outfight these seasoned warriors? Even the males who had respected Ray's calm demeanor sneered, shaking their heads in disbelief. But Ray didn't flinch. The first challenge was survival. The participants were to be dropped into the heart of Varia's wildlands, a treacherous jungle filled with dangerous creatures and shifting landscapes. It was a deadly place, where only the bravest or most foolish dared to venture. The contestants had to make their way across the jungle, navigating through thick vines, quicksand pits, and wild beasts, all without getting lost or falling prey to the creatures that hunted the land. The males, with their superior sight and enhanced strength, made quick work of the jungle, cutting through branches and fending off the beasts with ease. But Ray, she didn't need to see, she listened. The wind, the trees, the very ground beneath her feet whispered their secrets to her. She could feel the vibrations in the air, the subtle shifts in the ground as the creatures moved toward her. She knew when danger was near, and more importantly, she knew how to avoid it. However, the real test wasn't the wilds themselves, but the unseen obstacles. The elders had planned the arena to be filled with hidden traps, snares, pitfalls, and false paths that would confuse even the most experienced of warriors. But Ray was prepared. With each step, she could feel the trap lines beneath the earth, the slight hum of energy in the air that signaled an illusion, and the faint scent of danger on the breeze. The males, in their haste to prove themselves, often tripped and fell, caught by the traps they hadn't noticed. But Ray moved forward, her steps deliberate and calm. She didn't rush. She felt every inch of the land beneath her, understanding it in ways no one else could. It wasn't just survival, it was instinct, sharpened by years of training and listening to the world in a way that no one else had ever bothered to do. As she advanced deeper into the jungle, she noticed that Kaldor, one of the strongest competitors, had fallen behind. He was injured, trapped in a snare that had caught his leg. The other males had long since passed him, focused on their own progress. Ray, without hesitation, moved toward him. Kaldor grunted in pain, his breath shallow. "Leave me," he hissed. "You'll only slow down." But Ray didn't listen. She bent down, feeling the ropes that held him. In one swift motion, she untangled the snare with ease, freeing him. Kaldor stared at her in shock, not understanding how she had done it so quickly, so precisely. "How did you know?" he asked, his voice low. "I listened," Ray replied simply. "I felt the vibrations, the way the trap was set. It wasn't difficult." Kaldor, still in disbelief, rubbed his leg and stood up. He tried to mask his surprise, but the admiration in his eyes couldn't be hidden. "You're different," he muttered, unsure of what to make of her. Ray didn't answer. She just turned, continuing her path through the jungle, leaving Kaldor to follow her or not. The first test had been passed. Ray had outsmarted the jungle itself, surviving the deadly landscape with nothing but her wits and senses. But the next tests were far from over. The competition was only getting started, and the real challenge, her true test of strength and mind, was yet to come. But one thing was clear: Ray was not going to be the one who failed. Ray's unexpected skills. As the sun sank behind the jagged peaks of various highlands, casting long shadows over the jungle, the competition had only just begun. The first trial had been a test of survival, but the second test would be one of the mind. The elders had planned it carefully, an ancient riddle, hidden deep within the labyrinthine ruins that lay at the heart of the jungle. It was a place where few dared to venture, filled with traps, puzzles, and relics of a long-lost civilization. The males were confident, sure that their physical strength and cunning would carry them through the labyrinth. Ray, however, approached the ruins differently. She could feel the ancient energy that flowed through the stones, a power that whispered secrets to her in a language she could understand. Her blindness, which had always been seen as a curse, now seemed like the key to unlocking the mysteries of the past. The labyrinth stretched before them, a maze of crumbling walls and twisting corridors. The stone was covered in moss and thick vines, and the air was heavy with the scent of earth and decay. The challenge was clear. The first to reach the heart of the labyrinth and decipher the riddle would win the second trial. But the maze was not what it appeared. It was a place of illusions, designed to confuse and mislead even the most skilled warriors. The males who had expected a simple test of navigation soon found themselves lost. The walls seemed to shift, and the path they had followed one moment was gone the next. They called out to each other, their voices echoing off the stone, but no response came. The maze was designed to trap them in confusion, and for the first time, they began to panic. But Ray, she was unfazed. While the others stumbled through the maze, Ray stood still, letting the silence speak to her. She reached out with her senses, not just her hearing, but something deeper, an instinct that allowed her to feel the vibrations of the air and the subtle shifts in the environment. It was as if the labyrinth itself was alive, breathing with its own rhythm. She could hear the faint hum of energy in the walls, the delicate tremor of a trap being triggered far off in the distance. One of the males, Goran, cursed loudly as he collided with a false wall. "This place is a trap," he yelled, his voice filled with frustration. "We're wasting time." Ray, standing motionless, seemed to ignore the noise. She turned her head slightly, listening for the faintest of sounds, the soft crack of a stone shifting beneath her feet. She stepped forward, her movements slow but deliberate. With each step, she seemed to be reading the maze, understanding its language in ways the others could not. Kaldor, who had followed her through the jungle, now caught up with her. He had been watching her, wondering how she was navigating so effortlessly. His confusion grew as he watched her touch the stone walls, her fingers gliding over the ancient carvings like she was reading them. "How do you know where to go?" Kaldor asked, a mixture of awe and disbelief in his voice. "There's nothing here to guide us." Ray's lips curled into a faint smile, though she didn't answer immediately. She felt a vibration beneath her feet, a hum from deep within the stone that pulsed like a heartbeat. She followed it, walking with confidence where the others had stumbled. "I don't need to see the walls," she said quietly, her voice calm and steady. "I can feel them." Kaldor's eyes narrowed. There was something about Ray that was beginning to unsettle him. Her abilities were unlike anything he had ever encountered. The way she moved through the maze, as if she could read the stones, as if she could hear the whispers of the labyrinth itself, it was extraordinary. And yet, it seemed so unnatural. "Don't get ahead of yourself," he warned, though his tone was more hesitant than usual. "The riddle is still waiting." Ray paused for a moment, tilting her head as though listening to something in the distance. Then she stepped forward, her hands brushing along the hidden door in the stone. Her fingers traced the grooves in the wall, feeling the slight shift in the texture as the door slowly slid open. "I already know the answer," she said softly, her voice carrying a note of certainty. Kaldor's eyes widened in disbelief. "What? You haven't even seen the riddle?" But Ray wasn't listening to him. She had already felt the puzzle before her, an ancient mechanism that had once been used to protect the heart of the labyrinth. She pressed her fingers to the wall, feeling the subtle vibrations of the energy running through the stones, guiding her hand to the right place. With a soft click, the riddle was solved. The massive stone doors at the center of the maze groaned open, revealing the inner sanctum, a dark, hollow chamber filled with strange, glowing symbols. The other males, who had been lost in the maze for hours, finally stumbled into the chamber, only to find Ray standing at its center, her expression unreadable. They were covered in sweat, their faces strained with exhaustion, but it didn't matter. Ray had already won. "Impossible." Goran spat, his voice full of disbelief. "How could you have solved it? You couldn't have seen the clues." Ray turned to face him, her expression calm but firm. "I don't need to see the clues. I only need to listen." She stepped aside as the elders entered the chamber. Theris, the leader of the council, eyed her with a mixture of curiosity and respect. His old, sharp gaze lingered on her for a moment, as though trying to understand the secret of her abilities. "You've passed the second trial," he said, his voice cold but begrudgingly impressed. "But there is more to come. The final trial awaits, and it will test you in ways you cannot imagine." Ray nodded, her face set in determination. The journey had only just begun, and already she had proven herself more than capable. The trials were far from over, but with each step, she could feel the power within her growing. The mystery of her blindness, the strange abilities she possessed, everything was coming together. She had only just begun to scratch the surface of what she could truly do. And soon the others would realize that Ray was more than just a blind girl. She was something far more dangerous, something they could never have anticipated. The unexpected ally. The air around Ray crackled with anticipation. The labyrinth had been conquered. The elders had been forced to acknowledge her abilities, but that was only the beginning. The final trial loomed ahead, a combat challenge unlike any the competitors had faced before. The rules were simple: survive, outwit, and outfight the deadliest creatures that roamed the planet. It would push the remaining warriors to their limits, testing their strength, speed, and strategy. But Ray was not like the other competitors. She wasn't trained in physical combat, nor did she rely on brute force. Her strength lay in her senses, an instinct that transcended sight and hearing. She could feel the rhythm of the battle, the pulse of the air, the faintest tremor in the ground. It was an advantage that no one, not even Kaldor could have predicted. The elders had set the arena deep within the heart of the Varia Plains, a vast open field surrounded by towering cliffs and dense forests. The creatures that inhabited the region were legendary, predators of terrifying power and cunning. Among them were the thunder beasts, massive creatures with armored hides and claws that could slice through stone. There were also the swift fangs, nimble, wolf-like creatures that moved like shadows, striking with deadly speed. The competitors were to face them all, alone. As the competitors stood in the center of the arena, the ground beneath them began to rumble. The sky overhead darkened, the clouds swirling into a violent storm. From the trees, a deep, low growl echoed. The thunder beasts were coming. The males, large and powerful, immediately spread out, their weapons ready. They moved as one, each confident in their ability to defeat whatever came their way. But Ray, standing still at the center of the arena, seemed calm, as though she were waiting for something. Her senses were sharp, too sharp for the others to understand. She could hear the low growl of the beasts, but she also heard something else. A faint, irregular rhythm, an unnatural noise, something that didn't belong. A thunder beast burst from the trees, charging toward the contestants with terrifying speed. Its massive claws scraped against the earth, sending rocks flying in all directions. The males scattered, their weapons raised. They attacked with force, but the creature was quick, evading most of their strikes. It rolled, sending waves of fear through the air. The sound was deafening. Kaldor, who had been watching Ray from the corner of his eye, saw her standing still. How could she not run? How could she not fight back? Ray, Kaldor called, his voice laced with concern, "Get out of the way." But Ray didn't move. She tilted her head slightly, listening, feeling. Her hand reached out to the air, and she focused on the vibrations that rippled around her. The thunder beast charged straight at her, but Ray was ready. With a fluid motion, she dropped to one knee just as the beast's massive claws slashed through the space where she had been standing moments before. The creature rolled in frustration as it missed its target. The males, still reeling from the beast's attack, tried to regroup. Kaldor swung his massive blade at the creature's armored hide, but it barely scratched the surface. He was strong, but the thunder beast was stronger. It snapped its jaws, narrowly missing his arm. "Hold steady," Kaldor shouted, rallying the others. "We need to work together." But Ray wasn't waiting for instructions. She had already moved, quietly, almost effortlessly. As the thunder beast reared back for another strike, Ray darted forward. Her movements were swift, precise, as though the ground itself was guiding her. The other males barely registered her movement before she reached the beast, her hands touching its hide, feeling the pulse of its muscles beneath the surface. Without hesitation, she reached into the heart of the creature's defenses, finding a weak point beneath its thick armor. With a quick, focused strike, she plunged her hand into the soft spot, sending a ripple through the thunder beast's body. The creature rolled in pain and staggered back, but the damage had been done. It collapsed, defeated, its massive body falling to the ground with a thunderous crash. Kaldor stood frozen, his sword still raised, staring at Ray in disbelief. You killed it," he muttered, his voice thick with shock. "How?" Ray didn't answer him. She simply wiped her hands on her tunic and moved on, her senses already tuned to the next danger. Kaldor was left standing there, his mind racing. He had always thought of Ray as a strange curiosity, someone to be pitied. But now, watching her defeat the beast with such ease, he was starting to see her differently. There was something about her, something powerful and unsettling, that he couldn't ignore. Before he could make sense of it, another growl echoed from the trees. The swift fangs had arrived. The smaller, faster predators were not as easy to defeat as the thunder beasts. They moved in packs, surrounding their prey with terrifying precision. The males, though skilled in combat, found themselves quickly overwhelmed by the swift fang's speed. The creatures darted in and out, striking with deadly precision, their fangs glinting in the dim light. The males struggled to land a hit, their large forms slow compared to the predator's nimbleness. But Ray was different. She didn't rely on speed or strength. She moved with them, her senses attuned to every shift in the air, every subtle sound. The swift fangs, thinking her an easy target, lunged toward her, but she was already gone, vanishing into the shadows of the trees. Caldor fought off a swift fang that lunged at him, his sword flashing through the air. As the creature dropped to the ground, he looked around, realizing that Ray had not only disappeared, but had drawn the pack into a trap. He heard a faint rustling and turned just in time to see Ray's hands strike from the shadows. In one swift motion, she disabled the pack leader, disarming it without a single cut from a blade. The others hesitated, confused by her sudden presence, and within moments, they were defeated, each swift fang incapacitated without any loss of life. The arena grew silent. The males stood, panting and covered in sweat, while Ray stood at the center of the battlefield, her face calm and composed. The creatures were dead, but she had done it without unnecessary violence, outwitting, outmaneuvering, and defeating them with the precision of a master. Caldor stepped forward, his face betraying a mixture of awe and respect. "I don't understand," he said, his voice softer now, as though speaking to himself. "How do you do it?" Ray turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "I listen," she said simply. "I feel the world in ways no one else does." Caldor nodded slowly, his mind struggling to comprehend what he had just witnessed. There was no denying it now. Ray was not just a blind girl. She was something more, something dangerous, something powerful. And in that moment, Caldor realized something else. He was no longer just a competitor in this trial. He had become her ally, the heart of the storm. The storm over various plains grew fiercer with every passing minute. The sky crackled with thunder, and the winds howled like the voices of ancient spirits. It was as though the planet itself was alive, watching, waiting. The elders had promised that the final trial would be the most difficult, and they weren't wrong. The last challenge was no ordinary battle. It wasn't about brute strength, speed, or even intelligence. It was about survival. The competitors were to face an environment that would challenge every aspect of their being. The arena had been transformed into a deadly storm zone, with winds that could tear flesh from bone, rain that burned like acid, and creatures that thrived in chaos. It was a trial designed to push them to the edge, to see who would rise above the storm and who would be consumed by it. Ray stood at the edge of the arena, her feet planted firmly in the mud as the winds lashed at her. Her hair, once neatly tied, was whipped around her face, but she didn't flinch. The other competitors, their eyes wide with fear, were struggling against the fierce gusts of wind. The storms were unlike anything they had ever experienced, and they knew that only the strongest would survive. Caldor, who had grown strangely protective of Ray in the last few trials, shouted over the roar of the wind. "Ray, we need to find shelter. It's too dangerous." But Ray didn't answer. She wasn't afraid. She was listening to the storm. She could feel the pulse of the wind, the way it shifted in the air. There was a rhythm to it, a pattern she could sense even through the chaotic thrashing of the storm. It wasn't just a random force of nature. It was a warning, a sign. The storm was more than just wind and rain. It was alive, just like the labyrinth, just like the creatures that roamed the planet. The other competitors scattered, each seeking shelter from the storm. They fought against the winds, their weapons in hand, ready to face whatever dangers lurked in the chaos. But Ray remained still, her feet grounded, her body focused. The storm was trying to break them, to force them to panic, but she wouldn't give in. She had faced worse. A deep growl echoed in the distance, and Ray's senses sharpened. She didn't need to see the creature. She could feel its presence, the vibrations it sent through the earth. It was coming for them. The most dangerous of the storm's denizens, a creature known as the Sky Reaper. The Sky Reaper was a beast unlike any other. It had the body of a massive bird, its wings black as night and stretching to nearly 20 feet across. Its talons were sharp enough to pierce steel, and its beak, curved like a scythe, could sever a limb with a single strike. It was a predator of the skies, and it thrived in the storm, hunting with deadly precision. Ray could feel its approach, the way the air around her shifted as it descended from the dark clouds above. The males, distracted by the storm's fury, hadn't noticed yet, but Ray did. She could hear the wings beating through the wind, a sound like thunder that grew louder with each passing moment. "Ray," Calder shouted, his voice desperate. "We need to move. It's coming." Ray didn't respond. She had already moved. She didn't need Caldor's warning. She was already ahead of him, her body moving with a fluidity that seemed almost unnatural. She had no time to explain. There was no time for words. The Sky Reaper was fast, and it was hungry. The beast swooped down from the dark clouds above, its massive wings casting a shadow over the entire arena. Its eyes gleamed with hunger as it spotted the competitors below. It shrieked, a sound so piercing that it seemed to shake the very air. The males, stunned by the creature's speed, barely had time to react. They raised their weapons, but the Sky Reaper was already upon them, its talons slashing through the air. Caldor, struggling to keep his balance in the winds, swung his sword at the creature, but the Sky Reaper dodged with ease, its movements so fast that they seemed to blur. The beast's talons scraped across his armor, leaving deep gouges in the metal. But Ray wasn't afraid. She was already ahead of them, her eyes closed as she focused on the wind, on the rhythms of the storm. She could feel the Sky Reaper's movements, its patterns. The wind was its ally, and Ray was its adversary. She moved with a precision that was almost supernatural. As the Sky Reaper dove again, its talons aimed at Caldor's throat, Ray stepped forward, her hand outstretched. She felt the air shift, the wind change course as she altered its flow. The Sky Reaper hesitated for a split second, just long enough for Ray to strike. With a swift motion, she reached up, her fingers grazing the beast's wing as it passed overhead. Her touch sent a shockwave through the air, destabilizing the creature in mid-flight. The Sky Reaper shrieked in pain as it lost its balance, its wings flailing wildly. Ray didn't give it a chance to recover. She pressed the attack, moving with grace and speed, guiding the winds around her, using the storm itself as her weapon. She reached for the creature's talons, the vibrations in the air telling her exactly where to strike. With a deft motion, she disabled one of the creature's claws, forcing it to falter. The Sky Reaper let out a deafening scream, and with one final, desperate push, it ascended back into the sky, its wings beating against the storm as it retreated. The storm seemed to calm in the wake of its departure, the winds dying down as if the beast's retreat had quelled the chaos. Caldor, still reeling from the near miss, looked at Ray with disbelief. You stopped it." Ray didn't respond. She simply stood there, calm amidst the storm, as though nothing had happened. Her senses were still alive with the echoes of the battle, but she was already moving on. The storm wasn't over. Not yet. But something had changed. The other competitors, who had been watching from the safety of the distant cliffs, were now approaching, eyes wide with fear and respect. Ray had done the impossible. She had faced the Sky Reaper and forced it to retreat. Her abilities, which had once been seen as a curiosity, were now undeniable. She wasn't just surviving the trials, she was mastering them. Caldor stepped forward, his face now filled with something deeper than respect. "You're not just another contestant, are you?" he asked, his voice low, as if he was finally starting to understand. "You're something else." Ray turned to him, her expression unreadable. "I'm just a girl who listens," she said quietly. But Caldor, for the first time, realized that she was far more than that. Ray wasn't just a contestant, she was a storm, and the others had no idea how far her power would go. The whispering shadows. The storm had passed, but the atmosphere in the arena had changed. The skies cleared, the winds softened, and the earth beneath the competitors' feet grew eerily still. It was as though the planet had taken a deep breath after the violent chaos, and now it was watching, waiting. Ray stood at the center of the arena, her senses still sharp from the battle with the Sky Reaper. She could feel the vibrations of the earth, the subtle shifts in the air. The arena had grown quiet, but there was something beneath the silence, a low, whispering hum that she couldn't place. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the creatures of the storm. This was something else, something darker. Kaldor approached her, his expression still a mix of awe and uncertainty. He had seen her abilities in action, how she had maneuvered through the labyrinth, how she had outwitted the Thunderbeasts and the Swiftfangs, and how she had sent the Sky Reaper fleeing. But now he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to her, something deeper and more dangerous than even he could understand. "Ray," he called softly, not wanting to disturb her focus. "Are you okay? After everything that happened with the Sky Reaper, I'm worried." Ray didn't turn to face him. She simply stood there, her body relaxed but alert. Her fingers twitched as if she was sensing something in the air. "I'm fine," she replied, her voice calm and steady. "But there's something wrong here, Kaldor. This trial, it's not just about survival." Kaldor furrowed his brow. "What do you mean?" "I can feel it," Ray said, her eyes closing slightly as she reached out with her senses. "The arena is alive, Kaldor. The storm, the creatures, they're all part of something bigger. It's trying to break us down, piece by piece, to see how we react." The air around them seemed to thrum, like the planet itself was breathing, its heartbeat echoing in the wind. The other competitors were gathering in the distance, their expressions tense, but no one dared approach Ray. She had become something of a mystery, and not just to them, but to Kaldor as well. "You think this is a test?" Kaldor asked, his voice low. "More than just the creatures, more than just the storm." Ray nodded slowly. "It's testing something deeper, something inside us. It's not about our strength or our ability to fight. It's about our will to survive, to trust in ourselves when everything around us is telling us to give up. The arena, it's making us face our own fears, our own weaknesses." As she spoke, the whispering hum grew louder, and the ground beneath them seemed to tremble. The air was heavy with an unseen force, and Ray's expression grew more focused, more intense. She was listening to something that the others couldn't hear. Suddenly, the earth shifted beneath their feet. A low, rumbling sound echoed through the arena, as if the very ground itself was awakening. The competitors glanced around in confusion, their hands instinctively reaching for their weapons. But Ray's senses were already tuned to the source of the disturbance. "Get ready," she whispered, barely audible, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had faced this kind of danger before. "It's coming." From the shadows at the edge of the arena, dark figures began to emerge. At first, they seemed like nothing more than fleeting shapes in the distance, but as they drew closer, their forms became clearer. Tall, thin, and covered in dark, tattered cloaks, the figures moved with unnatural grace, gliding across the ground like wraiths. Their faces were hidden beneath the hoods of their cloaks, but Ray could feel their presence, cold, unsettling, and ancient. "The whispering shadows," Ray muttered under her breath, her face pale. "The ones who test the mind, not the body." Kaldor's grip tightened on his weapon. "What are they? More of the Elder's games?" "No," Ray replied, her voice hardening. "These aren't part of the trials, Kaldor. They're something else. They come from the darkest depths of this planet, old entities that exist between life and death. They feed on fear, on doubt, and if we're not careful, they'll consume us all." The whispering shadows moved closer, their presence suffocating. With every step they took, the air grew colder and the shadows around them deepened. The competitors, one by one, began to panic, their eyes wide with terror. Some gripped their weapons tightly, others took steps backward, unsure of how to respond. But Ray stood firm, her eyes locked on the approaching figures. She knew what was coming. The shadows would test them all, not with their strength, but with their minds, with their darkest fears. The first shadow stepped forward, its long skeletal hand reaching toward one of the competitors. The man froze, his eyes wide with horror, as if something had taken control of him from the inside. His body shuddered, his face twisted in terror as his weapon fell to the ground, forgotten. The other competitors were starting to lose their nerve. One by one, they began to falter, their fears manifesting before them. Some saw visions of past failures. Others saw loved ones in danger, helpless in the face of monstrous enemies. The whispering shadows were feeding on their terror, growing stronger with each moment. Calder stepped back, his eyes darting from one shadow to another. But Ray didn't flinch. She could feel the fear swirling around her, the whispers of doubt clawing at her mind. It was the same feeling she had in the labyrinth, in the jungle, in the storm. But this time, the fear wasn't just coming from outside, it was coming from within. She had faced this kind of trial before, back in the days when she had learned to survive on her own. The shadows didn't want to break her. They wanted her to break herself. They wanted her to doubt her abilities, to question her place in the trials. But she wouldn't allow it. She closed her eyes, focusing on the rhythm of the world around her, the whispers of the shadows, the vibrations in the air, the pull of the earth beneath her feet. She could hear their voices, calling out her deepest fears, but she wouldn't listen. "Get out of my head," Ray muttered under her breath, her voice strong. The shadows paused, their cloaked figures tilting their heads in unison, as if surprised. But they weren't done yet. They would push harder. With a deep breath, Ray opened her eyes and stepped forward, her hand outstretched toward the closest shadow. She could feel the fear trying to take hold of her, but she fought it, pushing through the mental fog. She wasn't alone. Calder was watching her, and something in his gaze made her realize that she didn't have to face this alone. The shadows recoiled for a brief moment, as if something was interfering with their power. Ray and Calder locked eyes, and for the first time, they understood each other completely. The shadows had come to break them, to make them question their worth, but they would stand together. The whispering shadows vanished into the air, retreating back into the dark corners of the arena. The challenge wasn't over, but the first test had been passed. Ray had faced her fears, and in doing so, she had shown the others how to fight back against the darkness. Calder stepped forward, his expression softening. "You were right," he said, his voice quieter than before. "This isn't just a trial of strength. It's about surviving what's inside." Ray nodded, her face unreadable. "Yes, and there's more to come." The final choice. The air was still. After the chaos of the whispering shadows, the arena felt impossibly quiet, as if the planet itself was holding its breath. The remaining competitors, only a handful now, stood in a circle at the center of the arena, their bodies worn and their minds shaken from the trials they had endured. Calder, Ray, and a few others were the last left standing, and yet they were all aware of one truth: the real test had just begun. Ray felt it first, an unexplainable pressure that seemed to settle deep into her bones. It was as if the ground itself was alive, pulsing beneath her feet. She had felt this sensation before, back when she first entered the labyrinth, when she realized that trials were never about strength alone. But now the feeling was stronger. It was as though something was pulling at her, calling her forward, demanding that she make a decision. Calder was watching her closely, his eyes narrowed in thought. He had seen her battle through every trial, from the creatures of the storm to the whispering shadows, and yet he knew she was more than just a survivor. She was something else, something the elders hadn't anticipated. "Ray," Calder said, his voice low. "What's happening? Do you feel that?" Ray turned to face him, her eyes narrowing. "Yes," she replied quietly. "It's the final test." The elders had said that the trial would determine who was worthy to receive the planet's greatest gift, the ability to control the very forces of Varia itself. But now, Ray knew it wasn't just about winning anymore. It was about a choice that would shape the fate of the entire planet. The ground trembled, and in the distance, a dark, swirling shape began to rise. It was the heart of Varia, the source of the trials, the core that controlled everything on the planet, from the storms to the creatures, to the very earth itself. The core was alive, and it had been watching them all along. From the swirling darkness emerged a figure, tall, shadowed, and clad in ancient armor. It was the leader of the elders, the one who had orchestrated the entire competition. His voice rang out, powerful and filled with authority. "Congratulations, competitors," the figure said, his voice echoing across the arena. "You have endured trials beyond comprehension, but now you must prove your true worth. The final test is not a battle of strength, but a test of will, a test of choice." Ray's pulse quickened as she felt the weight of his words. The leader continued, his voice growing colder. "The power you seek to control, Varia's very essence, is not something to be taken lightly. It is a gift, but it comes at a cost. Those who choose to wield it will forever be bound to the planet. They will be its guardians, its protectors, but they will also bear its burdens. The choice is yours. Embrace the power and become one with Varia, or reject it and leave the trials behind forever." The competitors exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what to make of the elder's words. But Ray wasn't afraid. She had come to understand Varia, to feel its pulse and rhythm. The planet wasn't just a test, it was alive, and it had been testing them all along. The power wasn't something to be taken, it was something to be earned. Caldo looked at Ray, his eyes filled with both respect and uncertainty. "What are you going to do?" Ray met his gaze, her face unreadable. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing against her, the pull of the planet's core calling to her. But she knew something Caldo didn't. "I can't make this decision alone," Ray said softly. "I need your help, Caldo. This isn't just about me. It's about all of us." The leader of the elders watched them, his eyes glowing with ancient knowledge. "You must choose," he said, his voice booming. "The power of Varia will not be given to those who do not accept their role in the balance. You must decide. Will you protect the planet, or will you abandon it?" Ray turned to Caldo, her heart heavy with the weight of the choice. She could feel the planet's power inside her, calling to her, offering her the ability to reshape the world. But it wasn't just about power, it was about responsibility. She took a deep breath and closed her eyes, centering herself. The decision was not hers alone. It was about the future of Varia, about the future of everything that had come before. She had seen the storm, she had seen the creatures, and she'd have felt the whispers of the shadows. All of it was part of a delicate balance that had been maintained for centuries. If she accepted the power, she would be bound to the planet, bound to its will, its guardianship. But if she rejected it, Varia would remain as it was, untouched, uncontrolled. The balance would be broken, and the trials would end, leaving the planet to its own devices. Ray opened her eyes and looked at Caldo. He was watching her, waiting for her decision. She could see the uncertainty in his eyes, the same doubt she had once felt, but now she knew what she had to do. "I choose to protect Varia," Ray said, her voice clear and unwavering. "I will accept the power, but I will not let it consume me. I will be its guardian, not its master." Caldo's expression softened, and he nodded. "Then I stand with you." The elders' leader stepped forward, his glowing eyes piercing through the silence. "So be it," he said. With a wave of his hand, the core of Varia glowed brightly, sending a pulse of energy through the entire arena. The power of the planet surged around Ray, filling her with strength, clarity, and a deep connection to the earth itself. The storm calmed, the creatures faded into the distance, and the arena became still. Ray felt the power of Varia course through her veins, but she did not falter. She did not lose herself in the flood of energy. Instead, she became one with it, using the planet's essence to fuel her resolve. "You are now bound to Varia," the leader intoned, his voice resonating with finality. "You will protect it, and in turn, it will protect you. But remember, this power is not a gift, it is a responsibility." Ray nodded, her heart steady. "I understand." As the final trial came to a close, Rey stood at the center of the arena, not as a competitor, but as a protector of the planet. She had made her choice, and she knew the road ahead would not be easy. But she also knew that she would not walk it alone. Kaldor, her ally, stood beside her, and together they would face the challenges ahead, guardians of Varia, bound by a power older than time itself. The elders, satisfied with the outcome, faded into the shadows, leaving Rey and Kaldor alone in the arena. The final trial had ended, but the true journey had just begun.